Freedom from restrictions. It was 7 o'clock in the evening, and silence hung over the place when my father the monk and I began stamping our feet in the desert sands, walking at times and standing at others, contemplating topics too sublime for a human pen to write about. We wandered for a long time, unaware or unwilling to know, until we finally arrived at the monastery's doorstep. We sat down to discuss the topic, the release of the soul. Freedom from restrictions, residues and restrictions. I don't mean the release of the soul from the body, the meaning intended by Simeon the elder when he said, "Now, Lord, let your servant depart in peace, according to your word." I mean the release of the soul while it is still in the body, its release from all the bonds and restrictions surrounding it, when complete peace begins and man lives in the freedom of the children of God. Do you see, my dear brother, the child after his baptism, his soul is free and liberated, as God created it in him? Then do you know what happened to it? The world, custom, and environment have deposited many sediments upon it, and as a result, it has been bound by many restrictions that hinder its progress to where it wants to go, to unite with God and abide in Him. All that the children of God seek is the liberation of the spirit from all this, its liberation from the constraints of the world and the environment, and its liberation also from the constraints of human sense and wisdom. Here, the monk turned and said, "Do some think that when the Lord Christ said, 'Unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven,' he meant, unless you become small and become like children? No, rather, he wanted to say, unless you grow greatly in spirit and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." Limitations of the senses. A monk stood before Saint Macarius the Great, having been plagued by self-righteousness until he thought he had been freed from adultery, love of money, and anger. The Holy Father asked him how he felt when he saw a woman. He replied, "I know she is a woman, but I run away so that I don't desire her." He also asked him how he would feel if he saw money thrown in the desert. Could he tell it apart from pebbles? He replied that he could, but he prevented himself from loving money. The saint asked him a third time how he would feel if someone insulted him. He replied that he felt insulted, but he did not harbor anger in his heart. Here, the saint turned to the monk and told him that he was still suffering and that he needed more struggle. He began to preach to him. It is the limitations of the senses, my dear reader, that make a person differentiate between a man and a woman, an elderly person and a young woman, a beautiful girl and an unbeautiful girl. It is also the limitations of the senses that make him differentiate between money and pebbles. What, then, about insult and praise? A monk went to Saint Macarius and asked for advice. The saint ordered him to go and praise the dead. He went and praised them, but none of them responded. The saint ordered him to go and speak harshly to them. He did so, but no one responded. The saint said to the monk, "And so you, since you have died to this world, must be like these dead people. You are not affected by anything, and it makes no difference to you whether people praise you or criticize you." Once, a wealthy man brought a monetary donation to the monastery to be distributed among the monks. In order for the abbot to deliver a practical sermon to this wealthy man, he set the money aside and ordered the bell to be rung. The monks gathered. The Father Abbot asked them to make a donation and take whatever they needed from this money. Despite the intense insistence, none of them took anything. The wealthy man was deeply moved and asked to become a monk. The world, my beloved brother, and the body as well, have deposited many sediments on our senses. One of the results has been that many worldly, material and physical things have begun to appear to us in a more beautiful form, more attractive, and more deeply affecting the soul. When the soul is elevated and free to some extent from the constraints that hinder its path, its feelings will be greatly elevated, or rather, it will be freed from worldly senses and understand things with a different spiritual perception. If you were to travel far away from your family, and then meet them after this long separation, and they embrace you with love and intense longing, would you, in the midst of that love in which your soul immerses itself, feel that your father, the man, is different from your mother, the woman, your brother, the boy, and your sister, the girl? Would a rescue worker in a fire or drowning accident feel that the body he is carrying, saving from destruction, is the body of a boy or a girl, a man or a woman? No, I assure you that if he did any of these things, he would expose himself and the one he is working to save to death. Do you not see, then, that the spirit transcends the senses, and that there are times when the senses are completely or partially paralyzed because the spirit is more preoccupied with them? And so, in your spiritual life, you must free yourself, as much as possible, from the shackles of the senses. Then you will look at things from a different perspective. You will not be attacked by lust, lust of the eye, lust of the body, lust of money, lust of people, or the pride of life. Rather, you will be like the angels of God in heaven, looking at everything with that simple gaze about which the Lord Christ said in his Sermon on the Mount, "If your eye is simple, your whole body will be full of light." Matthew 6:22. However, these thoughts were not the subject of the conversation between my father, the monk, and me. We were talking about something deeper than this, about the position of the senses when understanding and contemplating the divine. Physical sensation is physical and limited, so it cannot examine God, the infinite Spirit. Moreover, human sense is prone to error, and it often errs in distinguishing between right and wrong. The disciples returned to the Lord Christ rejoicing and said to him, "Even the demons submit to us in your name." The Lord replied, "Do not rejoice in this," Luke 10:17-20, for their sense was faulty. Consider also the murderer who avenged himself for his honor. Isn't he filled with a sense of satisfaction as if he had accomplished a great deed? That is a faulty sense. Likewise, my beloved brother, many sensations may come to you in your prayers, retreats, and meditations. Examine them carefully, for they may be unhealthy human sensations. And try to free your spirit from the shackles of the senses. I must say that the sense of the world and its beings is impaired when one is absorbed in the divine. Hannah was praying in the temple. Her soul was so absorbed before God that she was unaware of what was happening around her. Even Eli the priest, believing her to be drunk, said to her, "How long will you be drunk? Arise, take your wine off you." 1 Samuel 1:13-14, and so it is with you. If you are completely devoted to prayer or meditation, you will be completely unaware of what is going on around you. Some people may be talking next to you, there may be a commotion, and many scenes may be passing by, but you are unaware of all of this because you are preoccupied with other matters in the spiritual world. Are your senses relatively inactive because of your soul? I don't know, but I do know that St. John the Short would go through periods in his meditations when people would talk to him, and he would not hear their voices nor know what they were saying. The questioner would ask him again, and the saint would reply, "What do you want, my son?" The questioner would repeat his request, and the saint would still not hear him. This was because his soul was occupied with other, more important, and deeper matters, more closely related to hearing and memory. Sometimes they would ask him questions, and he would respond with theological reflections that had nothing to do with what they were asking him, because he had not heard what they said. His soul was based on the senses.